Hey everybody, it's Party Elite here with another video discussing Total War Warhammer 2. Now that the excitement around Skaven has peaked and we're eagerly awaiting the launch of the game, I wanted to speculate on a possible DLC arc for the second game. As you all know, I'm a big fan of speculation, so join in with me and let me know your thoughts below. This was originally going to be a single video, but as I started to lay it all out and began writing more lore than I expected, it has since ballooned into a mini-series that I hope you'll enjoy. If you do, make sure to drop a like or a comment just to let me know. And once more to be clear, this is all speculation. I'm not privy to any top secret details with regards to DLC. First things first, we're very familiar now with the base 4 factions: the Lizardmen, the High Elves, the Dark Elves, and Skaven. Looking at the revealed map, however, one has to wonder if we'll be getting an early 5th faction like we did with Bretonnia, access to battles from the start with a campaign coming later down the pipeline. There are a few contenders, but it does feel like Creative Assembly are fans of the vampire counts, so if we are getting a 5th faction, my guess is between the Vampire Coast and Strygos Empire. There's a chance it'll be Skeggi as a Norska clone, or less likely in my opinion, Bretonnia will make a similar show as last time, considering we have their Crusaders. I think Araby is not going to be a factor until we're further into the life of the game, but that is a conversation for another day. I think most of us are familiar with the undead pirates of the Vampire Coast led by Luthor Harkon, a longtime adversary of the Lizardmen in the area. In fact, defeated by them at the Battle of the Eclipse, Luthor Harkon has many undead at his service and has a rich and entangled past when it comes to some of the other factions of the Warhammer world. Made a vampire by Abharash with ties to Lamia, and later having gone to Morcaine to serve under King Ushoran and the Strygos Empire, Luthor Harkon ended up on the coast of Lostria years later after the ship carrying his coffin was attacked by Norse pirates. With a great past behind him, it only makes sense he would try to recreate that greatness. Many sailors died in the treacherous waters nearby, giving Luthor what he needed to create a grand, vampiric pirate fleet and army. That was only the first rung in his ladder, though. His desires for greatness bubbled, and Luthor marched about seeking treasures and troves until he eventually ended up at the ruined city of Huatl. Here, after days of excavations, his minions came upon a chamber sealed behind magical glyphs. As his minions tried to break the seal for their master, the magic that kept them animated was drained by the glyphs, forcing Luthor to take matters into his own hands. Assaulting the glyphs with his dark magic, he was not prepared for the retaliation that was built to deal with more powerful sorcerers. The chamber began to crumble around him, and he found himself magically tied to the glyphs as they drained his life and magical energies. Eventually managing to break free and escape, Luthor found himself severely weakened. His mind was shattered, leaving him quite unstable, and his ties to the winds of magic were severed. Living on the brink of insanity with multiple personalities fighting for dominance over his now feeble mind, Luthor has one goal: to rid himself of this seemingly irreparable damage. With pistols and cutlass, the ability to regenerate when near death, and magical resistance from his curse, Luthor Harkon could be an interesting addition to the Warhammer battlefield, and though we're very likely to see him leading the Vampire Coast, we don't yet know if we'll be able to control him. If we do get the Vampire Coast as a faction, Luthor Harkon will likely not be able to use any magic, but his quest to heal himself might replace the Vortex campaign, having him chase after Lizardmen in the search of an artifact that might help him. If that's the case, we might see many abilities or artifacts unlocked through quest chains that give him strength in a way magic couldn't. Apart from Luthor Harkon, we might also see a second named general in the form of Captain Drekla, an undead sea captain. We might also see characters or units that carry Slan gold, giving them access to the lore of death, allowing the Vampire Coast to have access to magic. The Vampire Coast army might initially be made of standard vampire count units with slight aesthetic changes. We might see a pirate hat here or there, maybe a peg leg or two, and who knows, maybe the zombies will have pistolier variants at launch. The assets largely exist to get a first iteration out with the launch of the game, and if the full treatment was part of the plan, we might see some interesting thematic additions. We already know that Creative Assembly has a go-ahead from Games Workshop about new units and lore, so maybe I'm holding on to some hope for a great faction of swashbuckling crypt horrors. I imagine we'll see sea captains or fleet captains as heroes and generic lords, perhaps as close combat infantry similar to Free Company militia. We'd probably also get Syrenes or Sirens, much like Banshees, ethereal and floating about the battlefield. Of the core units, I imagine we'll see zombie pirate deckhands as melee combatants and zombie pirate gunnery mobs as ranged units, possibly again like the Free Company militia. Bloated corpses might just cause poison damage in melee, or they might actually explode on death, dealing some poison damage at the time, while scurvy dogs are likely to bring the same benefits as warhounds with poison, fast interceptors and archer hunters with poison damage. They might actually be a poisonous variant of razor-toothed rats. Wouldn't it be funny if the rat in that first trailer was actually one of these bad boys? He seems to be at some Lizardman ruins, a likely place to find Luthor and his horde. I think we're also likely to see Fellbats, as well as their more interesting variant, Deck Droppers. I think they'd make an absolutely hilarious airborne unit, firing their pistols frantically while flying about the battlefield. Animated Hulks will likely come in some variants, perhaps armored and unarmored, or with great weapons for anti-large damage, and these will be some of the larger, more threatening units. In fact, there might need to be a significant amount of exploration done here for the purpose of adding a serious cavalry capability to the army. We might also see sea creatures as either abilities, like how Wulfric is able to get a boat in the middle of a battle, or as actual units in Rotting Leviathans. Giant, historically accurate crabs make for great enemies and will certainly allow some room for creative beasts. Frightening and terrifying, I'd imagine these guys will make up the Terrorgeists, Crypt Horrors, and the like for the Vampire Coast. Carronades will likely act as artillery support, while deck gunners will likely be the more core artillery unit, firing armor-piercing anti-large ammunition, but maybe decent melee fighters as well, like Greenskin or Error Boys. Queen Bess, meanwhile, will either be a regiment of renown or a unit of her own as a piece of heavy artillery, possibly also pulling from the Black Arcs, provide bombardment support from the coast. The Vampire Coast also has its own variety of items. Firewater to allow units to spit fire once in the battle, undead parrots that provide magic damage resistance, the dirty serpent that might cause armor sundering and armor-piercing damage. There are plenty of possibilities. Also, with the release of the campaign achievements, things like Yar and Yurg make me think the Vampire Coast is a near certainty. But again, that's probably just me looking too deeply. The other potential but less likely fifth faction, in my opinion, is the Strygos Empire. The reason why I think this less likely is just because the Strygos Empire is all but destroyed and is just a husk of what it used to be. When the Greenskins destroyed the Empire in an act of vengeance, most Strigoni fled north, and yet we have this large mass of territory to the south of the Badlands, too far south to include the former capital of Morcaine, in fact. The Strygos Empire could go one of three ways, I think. Either it will be a playable fifth faction, a minor inconvenience to, or the ultimate location of the Tomb Kings. Let's not joke around. I would be very shocked if we don't get the Tomb Kings. So they'll either replace the Strygos Empire, the Neckarch Brotherhood, or both, leaving the other as initial competition for conquest, or having each other to contend with instead. If we get the Strygos Empire, Kedon is far too old to be the faction leader. He founded the Empire, corrupted by the Crown of Sorcery, which he found on the corpse of King Alcadazar of Khemri on the banks of the Blind River. Obsessed with death and necromancy, Kedon went from being a shaman to a powerful necromancer and expanded the Strygos Empire alongside Ushoran, creating many necromantic artifacts, some of which have been found, others which remain to be uncovered. Despite all this grandeur, he was eventually killed and usurped. His killer and successor is a more likely candidate. Ushoran, progenitor of the Strigoi bloodline, once his friend, decided that Morcaine and the Strygos Empire should belong to him and killed Kedon for it. Where Kedon had been a cruel king, Ushoran brought order and prosperity. His subjects did not fear him or any of the other immortal masters to come, as the vampires followed the law and did not feed upon their own. Though he is eventually killed by Neferata's cunning in steering the other vampire lines against him, and possibly being behind the greenskins that wawed upon the Strygos Empire at the same time, Ushoran is a pretty interesting character that could be brought back, like Vlad was. Hopefully he gets a unique model. I don't think we've ever seen him on tabletop, so Creative Assembly can get pretty creative with him. An army of ghouls and ghoul kings will be fun to play with, and Ushoran himself will likely be a vampire lord, as he supposedly hadn't given in to his primal urges like the rest of his folk had. Necromancers would also likely be a common sight, and I wonder if we'd see any turned humans, or if it'd be a monster's first kind of faction like Wintertooth. The campaign would likely see Ushoran seek vengeance for what was done to him, wiping out the Greenskins, chasing after the remaining vampire factions nearby, and potentially going after the Tomb Kings or maybe the city of Lamia if the map does include it. If we do get Kadan as a reanimated Lich, he might have similar goals. I don't think we'd see him as a faction leader though, perhaps a named character or an alternative starting position. As I mentioned earlier, the other possibility in my opinion isn't vampiric at all. Instead, we might get the Skeggi. Naturally, we can theorize every faction on the revealed map might appear as playable, but adding Skeggi would possibly result in a Horde-style faction that is otherwise missing from the game as we know it so far. That boot might be filled by Bretonnian Crusaders down the line as well. Skeggi was formed when Losterrikson discovered the immense wealth in the area, took back some as dowry, created a grand hall with his wealth, amassed a massive following that desired some of this wealth for itself, and returned to Lustria. I imagine Losterrikson will be the faction leader if we see Skeggi, and we might get a roster similar to Norska, with some of the monsters replaced for less icy variants. This would make sense from a development perspective as well, as Norska came around after Creative Assembly said they were done working on DLC for Game 1. Once again, we might get a campaign similar to the Vampire Coast, one that simply seeks some valuable riches or artifacts, maybe looking to destroy the lizardmen and the dwarfs nearby. Alternatively, it could be a campaign looking to conquer the seas by extension of territory owned, that is, it destroy the Vampire Coast, kill off other factions looking to make money off Lustria, that sort of thing. Whichever way it goes, I'm definitely glad to see the Vampire Coast on the map, and if the Strygos Empire is done with some unique flavor and flair, it'll certainly be a nice touch. Then again, it is very possible that Skeggi was always planned as the 5th faction, and that's what allowed Norska to happen. What are your thoughts on the possible 5th faction, if there even is one? What would you like to see, and how would you like to see it done? As always, thank you very much for watching, and if you'd like more Total War content, make sure you subscribe to this channel for an endless flow of battles, let's plays, news, and constant speculation.